Hello, everyone. We still have a few people logging in, so we'll give them just a minute or two to get settled, and then we'll get underway. All right, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Link Center today for the shared learning group as we focus on navigating the criminal legal system. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items while we get started. The session will be recorded, and the recording and the transcripts will be made available on our website. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with others. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. Please use the chat function in Zoom to communicate with other attendees and host during the webinar. You can use the chat by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. Please be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you make a comment, and you can change your display name by clicking on the three dots next to your name and selecting rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately to the host and panelists, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We have live captioning and ASL interpreters present today. We will be spotlighting the active speaker and the ASL interpreter throughout the webinar. If you click on View on your Zoom screen, you can change the way you see the panelists. And if you're having any trouble with your view, please let us know in the Q&A, and we'll try to help. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Stacy Nonamaker, who's going to get us started today. Stacy, it is all yours.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Hello, good afternoon or maybe morning to everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited about today's topic, navigating the criminal legal system. And for those of you who are joining us, you may be noticing that we've changed the name of today's topic, and I'm not going to give away anything that our presenters will be talking about a little later, but I'm just pointing out that we are talking about navigating the criminal legal system. And this is hosted through the Link Center, funded by the Administration for Community Living. If you want to learn more about the Link Center, if you don't already know about us, we encourage you to jump up on our website. You'll see both the QR code and the link to our website on your screen. And we're really hoping that it's a place that you can go to get some information, some resources, training materials, as we all work together to better support individuals with co-occurring conditions. So one of the things that we do here at the Link Center are these shared learning groups, and that may be a new name to some of you, shared learning groups, and really what does that mean? So just a little bit of context there. We host 4 meetings per quarter, 1 meeting per audience. This is for direct support professionals. We'll have 1 this afternoon for clinical professionals, 1 tomorrow for people with lived experience, and then 1 tomorrow for families of people with lived experience. And we encourage people, if a role just doesn't sound right, to jump on any or all of them, because the information related to the topic for the quarters are relatively the same. We do tailor some of the information and change some of the discussion questions for each group. And really what we hope with a shared learning group is that we at the Link Center work together as partners, people with lived experience, researchers, people who work on policy issues, to bring together what we know and what we're thinking about when it comes to this topic, but really providing opportunity, and you'll see that a little later in our time together, to hear from you all. And understand how and what you're thinking about this topic, your experience with the topic, So we will be transcribing and recording this meeting. Transcribing means we're going to write down everything that we say in the meeting, and all the materials that we will make available that we mentioned today on our website that I just talked about a moment ago. So hopefully that would motivate you a little bit to also check out our website. And we encourage you to share all of the information that we are presenting and sharing with you. So we're going to start with just really a prompt, and I see some of you are saying hello in the chat. So please say hello, introduce yourself, let us know your name, organization, what state you're from. That's so great to know who's joining us today. But also as you're in the chat, this is the first part where we want to really hear from you and hear, what are some of the websites you go to, places you get information, trainings that you thought have really been helpful when you think about navigating the criminal legal system. Here at the Link Center, the reason why we're so interested in hearing from you all is that we want to be elevating some of the good things that we don't know about that you may know about. We know we're not the only ones thinking about how do we better support people with co-occurring conditions. And we are not the only ones, certainly, that are thinking about how do we support people to navigate the criminal legal system. So again, we want to elevate the things that you may know about or have within your arsenal, and then also identify what are some of the gaps and the places where we as the Link Center can work together to fill those gaps. So as by way of an agenda today, again, encouraging you all to say hello in the chat. We're going to talk a little bit about why this topic, why navigating the criminal legal system. We are going to throughout today share some resources, trainings, and information that we hope will be helpful to you all. And then we'll spend some time doing a group exercise where, again, that's where we want to hear from you. We want to hear about your experiences and what you're thinking about the topic. So just again, to reiterate the goals and outcomes, we're going to share what we're doing at the Link Center related to navigating the criminal legal system. You're going to learn the importance of supporting someone and where to find resources about navigating the criminal legal system. We will learn what you think about supporting someone to navigate the criminal legal system. Hoping that you'll help us identify some needed resources and information that we can work together and perhaps even develop. And then we'll be able to listen to you as you help us come up with ways to solve some situations that we're going to present to you during the group exercise. So a few more things before I get to turn it over and we start really digging into today's topic. We call this sharing lived experience, and we work very closely with our steering committee at the Link Center, comprised of people from across the nation with very varied experiences and backgrounds, who have lived experience. And so they've helped us create sort of some level settings so that we're all on the same page as we go through today's meeting together. First is this meeting will be talking about people involved in the criminal legal system. And we know that some people have experienced trauma when it comes to this topic, and we acknowledge that it makes it hard sometimes to recover and move forward. We encourage everybody to take care of yourself, do what is necessary for your comfort and care, especially for topics like today's topic. We encourage you to be gentle with yourself and each other because this is hard work to do. We celebrate that we are all individuals from different backgrounds. We celebrate that we have shared experiences to learn from, and we know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. And And finally, we listen and share with open minds and kindness. We do not judge or blame others for what they share. Again, we think this is so important because the sharing part or shared part of today is really important to us at the Link Center because we view this as an opportunity to hear from our communities. Okay, so here's where we get to turn it over to our colleagues and partners at the Link Center from the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, Judy Detmer, Maria Crowley, and Zeta Richter. So I'm going to turn it over to Zeta. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and your willingness to join us and to learn together. As Stacy said, I'm Zeta Ricker. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Policy at the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. And I'm joined by my colleagues Judy Detmer, who's our Director of Technical Assistance, and Maria Crowley, who is Director of Professional Development. And we are very excited to be here with you today. Just quickly before we begin, want to share another reminder to take care of yourself. The topics in this presentation might be upsetting or hard for some people because they cover sensitive issues about the criminal legal system. It is absolutely okay to step away or take a break if you need to. Your well-being comes first, so please take care of yourself during the session. As Stacy alluded to, we will be using the term criminal legal system instead of criminal justice system throughout this presentation. And that is because the word justice might suggest fairness or equality. And we know that not everyone experiences justice or fairness and equality within the criminal legal system. The criminal legal system often treats people unfairly. And especially as we're thinking about those with disabilities or those from other marginalized communities. And so by saying criminal legal system, we want to recognize these unfair differences and highlight the legal rules that cause them. So before we really dive into some of our recommendations, we wanted to spend some time really setting the stage about the prevalence of those with disabilities in the criminal legal system, and some of the specific challenges that they may face. I really want to thank our steering committee at the Link Center for helping to inform some of this information. So people with disabilities are more likely to be victims of crime, get arrested, face charges, and spend more time in prison. And then once they are in the criminal legal system, people with disabilities deal with extra challenges. They might face unfair treatment. It can be especially hard for them to access services, particularly services that are disability informed. And this can make it even harder for them to get out of the system, especially as we think about those who might be released back into society. Rates of recidivism are higher for those with disabilities, or their likelihood to go back to jail and prison is higher because they have a disability, and some of the situations and treatment of those with disabilities within the criminal legal system. I'm going to turn it over next to Maria Crowley to really talk about the data that we see and how high the prevalence is, and then we'll think through some of our shared understanding before we think through some of the solutions that we might be able to offer. So I'll turn it over to Maria.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much. I am delighted to be able to spend a little bit of time with you today. Maria Crowley, I'm NASH's Director for Professional Development, and this is an area that we as an organization have spent a lot of time in, and just want to dig a little deeper to some of the challenges that we have taken a closer look at. Law enforcement, as we know, has a lot going on when they are dealing with some of the things that they encounter. And so they may not recognize what they see for what it is. Police may not recognize the signs of a brain injury and intellectual and developmental disabilities when they arrive at a scene for a number of reasons. Memory problems or communication challenges can be seen in a variety of ways, not necessarily for what they are. They may be seen as an individual who is being uncooperative or dishonest instead of having those challenges with communication. Those may also be seen as aggressive moves instead of someone who's being irritable or having impulse control issues. Police may misunderstand how someone with a brain injury or an intellectual or developmental disability is communicating or reacting, which may lead to unfair treatment. Survivors of trauma who have brain injury or intellectual or developmental disabilities may show signs of that trauma that officers are misinterpreting, which can cause further harm. And if we don't make some changes with training that we're providing or the kinds of things that we know that police need to know, there are a lot of consequences that are significant, and it's too late. You can see in front of you that half of the people that may encounter police die who have some kind of disability, and we don't want that. We need to make some changes with the ways that law enforcement interact with individuals. So we know that once someone is involved with the criminal legal system, there are some pretty staggering statistics there. 8.5% of the population, the general population, who are part of maybe the criminal legal system, the Centers for Disease Control consider that a public health crisis. It's a pretty significant percent. Well, 50 to 90% of people who are a part of the criminal legal system have a history of brain injury. That's a huge, disproportionate number of individuals. 40 to 50% of youth in the criminal legal system have had some kind of brain injury in the past, and 40% of people in prison have some sort of intellectual or developmental disability. That's very disproportionate to that 8.5%. We know that the longer individuals are a part of the justice system, and again, I'm saying the justice system instead of the criminal legal system, that's a habit that's hard to change, the more likely that brain injury may be there. With those kinds of rates, people struggle with being incarcerated. Their recall, their attention, their impulse control and behavior management, mental health challenges and substance use issues increase. People with brain injury, we know, report more adverse childhood experiences, and we know that women are at higher risk. Also part of that data. We know there's a high co-occurrence of mental health with individuals who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Studies show that 1/3 to 1/2 of children and adults with those disabilities also have at least one mental health condition. Children with intellectual and developmental disabilities also face trauma more often than children without those disabilities. Again, pretty significant here. Some additional statistics that you need to pay attention to with mental health co-occurrence and brain injury. Individuals who are a part of the criminal legal system disproportionate numbers here of folks who have had a history of substance abuse and brain injury, a history of mental illness and brain injury, those who have attempted suicide, who've had childhood trauma, adult trauma, school suspension, compared to the general population. Pretty staggering statistics here compared to the general population. And then the longer someone is in that system, the challenges worsen. And the number of times somebody's had a head injury, the more significant the challenges are. So you can see, as someone who's had no head injury, that blue bar, and I'm just going to read through these for those of you who may not be able to see this slide. For someone with no head injury, the numbers are lower. With one head injury, those numbers increase with these challenges. And then for those who have had more than one head injury, the numbers go up significantly with depression, anxiety, hallucinations, cognitive challenges, violent thoughts, suicidal ideation, and attempts. It's pretty staggering. So very important to pay attention to these things. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Judy Detmer. Or no, I think we're going back to Zeta.
Thank you, Maria, for helping to provide some of the statistics that highlight the really strong and unfortunate overlap within the criminal legal system. A few additional key points that we wanted to make sure we highlighted, which Maria already did share. There's often a lack of recognition that someone might have a disability, and that can make it even harder for them to get the right treatment. There's oftentimes, for those with brain injury and IDD, increased use of services while in prison for health and for mental health, but lower rates of completing treatment and disciplinary issues, more rule violations, more missed court dates, and higher rates of returning to prison. We also want to make sure to recognize that there is intersectionality within these challenges. Intersectionality means understanding how different aspects of a person's identity, like race, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, can overlap and combine to create unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. So one form of prejudice can amplify another rather than being considered separately. For example, someone who is a Black woman who has IDD might have some intersecting challenges in involvement with the criminal legal system. It is really important to recognize some of the racial disparities within the criminal legal system. Those who are Black, American Indian, Latinx are disproportionately have criminal legal system involvement than those that are white or Asian. And that can, as we saw with the statistics of those who have brain injury and IDD or other disabilities, the intersection is definitely there. People from marginalized racial and ethnic groups are more likely to be involved in the criminal legal system, as we just saw. Black people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and brain injuries are less likely to be diagnosed before they enter prison, and that can make it more hard for them to identify some of those specific challenges and get the support that they need while in prison. Women and transgender people, especially those from racial and ethnic minority groups, are often victims of trauma. And this may not be noticed or dealt with in the criminal legal system. Women and LGBTQ people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or brain injuries may face higher risks of gender-based violence, hate crimes, and exploitation. Intimate partner violence is also a significant challenge, and many folks that have intimate partner violence experience also have histories of brain injury as a result of that, and then may have criminal legal system involvement. And those compounding challenges can make it extra difficult as people navigate the system and they're unable to get the support that they might need. It is important to understand how these different challenges can overlap and to help everyone get the services that they need. We've given a lot of information about some of the background, but really this is small data sources, and there still needs to be some work done on what some of those solutions are. So we wanted to make sure to highlight the gaps because there really is not enough research on people in the criminal legal system with intellectual and developmental disabilities, brain injuries, or those who have both IDD and brain injury or other disabilities and mental health disabilities. We really do need more research and believe that having that research can help us to get better outcomes for people with disabilities, particularly as we think about what are some of the effective ways to support people who have IDD, brain injury, or other disabilities, and mental health co-occurrence, and our criminal legal system involved. So before we kind of talk through some of our recommendations for solutions, we wanted to kind of reiterate some of the things that we've shared so far and talk about our shared understanding and goals going into the next section. As I go through these, encourage you, if there are other things that you think are missing from this list, to please put them in the chat. I also want to highlight, as we're talking about the criminal legal system, we are really hoping for systemic change and want to make sure that anything that we're sharing does not put onus on people with lived experience to change the system, but rather on the system to change to better support people with disabilities. So people with disabilities often face fear, bias, and lack of resources when involved in the criminal legal system. Professionals may not know enough about disabilities, which can lead to errors like misidentifying a disability, assuming someone is not capable or trustworthy, or pressuring someone into admitting to something they didn't do. These mistakes can lead to wrong placements in institutions or people giving up their rights without realizing it. Individuals with disabilities are valuable and have the right to fair treatment. They should not face discrimination or mistreatment in the criminal legal system. They should have fair access to services and programs. And everyone with a disability deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, no matter their involvement in the criminal legal system or other personal traits. If you think there's anything we've missed as we've set some of this shared understanding, we definitely encourage you to put in the chat as we move on to the next part of our program. I think I'm going to turn it over to Judy Detmer next, and she's going to introduce a video with someone from lived experience who shared their story. Oh, quickly, I'll share, we have some resources here. There's many different resources out there. And these ones highlight some of kind of the background on the challenges that those who have IDD, brain injury, or other disabilities and criminal legal system involvement. And I think those will also be added to the chat. So now I'll turn it over to Judy.
All right, thank you. And we'll see if I can operate the video or not. We did want to share a video that I met with a woman about her lived experience with brain injury, as well as her experience with the criminal legal system. And I just thought it'd be more powerful to hear from her voice. I honestly have no clue how to run the video, so if someone can jump in and say
thank
to
you
me,
so much
there
for
you go.
taking your time to talk with me today. My life was dramatically altered by the consequences of experiencing severe emotional distress and sustaining multiple traumatic brain injuries. Unable to cope in healthy ways with personal challenges, I endured multiple head injuries, each resulting in significant periods of unconsciousness. These physical traumas, compounded by the existing burden of having a learning disorder, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression severely impacted my emotional regulation. The result was a cascade of negative changes. I became easily agitated and hypervigilant, struggling to control my emotions. Anger became a dominant force, hindering my ability to communicate effectively and advocate for myself. Lacking knowledge about my condition and the appropriate coping mechanisms, I felt lost and overwhelmed.
Michael, I know you, have known you for a while, but I didn't know all that you have experienced. So I've always been impressed by who you are as a person. Your experiences definitely shape who you are, and I'm more impressed even now hearing more about your life. So thank you for sharing all that with us. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the criminal legal system?
While I deeply respect the work of law enforcement officers, my experience with the criminal legal system was profoundly negative. I've endured physical injuries and sustained significant emotional trauma, including a deep seated fear of law enforcement. I believe that by working together, we can improve the system. This could include mandatory training on mental health and de escalation techniques for officers, as well as increased access to mental health resources for individuals in contact with the law. I am very grateful to see that these changes are beginning to be implemented in the state that I live in.
And that's a great deal in part to you. I know that you're a strong advocate, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done in your state, but also nationally, because this is going to be a national video. And I think that people hearing your message will be inspired to make some change as well. Can you talk a little bit about how your brain injury has made these experiences more challenging for you?
Having sustained multiple traumatic brain injuries during a period of intense personal and emotional distress profoundly impacted my ability to navigate the criminal legal system. My emotional regulation was severely compromised, making it incredibly difficult to remain calm and communicate effectively in stressful situations. Unfortunately, encounters with law enforcement officers who lack training in de escalation techniques often escalated, leading to arrests that might otherwise been avoided.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Can you talk a little bit from your perspective? What do you wish could have been different in your experiences with law enforcement?
It's difficult to say what I wish could have been different. In an ideal world, I would have encountered a system that recognized and responded to the unique challenges I faced. A system where law enforcement and court personnel were trained to understand and de escalate situations involving individuals with brain injury, learning disabilities, mental health conditions. Instead, I experienced repeated arrests, leading to a criminal record that has significantly impacted my life. However, I also believe that these experiences, while incredibly difficult, have motivated me to advocate for change and to improve the system for others facing similar challenges.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me.
All right. I was so glad that she was willing to do that video with me. And I'll just say that she is a significant advocate in her community. I think would be a great person for anybody else willing and wanting to do some of that advocacy. So we've been talking a lot about what the problem is and what the gaps are and the issues are. I get the fun part of talking about what could some of the solutions be. And so when we think about the criminal legal system, we use this as a framework. This was the sequential intercept model that was developed by Policy Research Associates at the Gaines Center. And it helps us who are not engaged in the criminal legal system as professionals to better understand kind of how people move through the criminal legal system. And so it gives us kind of a framework for people to think about, where can I think about making change? As Zeta said, we want to make systemic change, but we also need to start with making change for individuals. And each one of these intercepts, 0 through 5, give us an opportunity to think about, how are we making change? How are we improving the outcomes for people with disability and co-occurring behavioral health in the criminal legal system? So I'm going to just go into each one a little bit to give you an example of that. When we think of the first intercept, and it's really 0 and 1 where this applies, it really is, as Michael said in her video, a lot about training. I know training can be frustrating because it feels like sometimes it's falling on deaf ears, but it is an essential component to thinking about, how do we start making systems change. The other piece is, though, developing more co-responder programs that help law enforcement partner with behavioral health specialists to understand how to de-escalate and support people versus potentially getting people escalated. And then thinking about, how can we help people who use services often, and checking in with them after a crisis. So we know there are several people that is just a way of life, that they're needing crisis support regularly. So how can we provide follow-up to help them in between those situations and maybe prevent them? When we think about intercepts 2 and 3, and so just as, because you don't have that in front of you, intercepts 2 is really about that initial detention, and 3 is about that court appearance. There is a lot of room for improvement here, and I think a lot of opportunity for us to think about, how do we support someone. A big piece of that is screening. As was said earlier, people with disabilities or mental health and substance use disorders are not being identified as they come into the system, and there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding because of that. We need to improve our sharing of information between jails and community health providers. There is some good work that happens within a jail setting that never gets out then as they transition into the community. So we want to improve our communication. The other thing I would think about with intercepts 2 and 3 is thinking about, how does the Americans with Disability Act come into play? How does universal communication come into play? Nobody entering into a court system has a good grasp on what's happening. People with disabilities are even at more of a disadvantage. So it's just something we need to think about, is plain language. How do we support them in those ways? In Intercept 3, there are a lot of treatment courts, and there's specialty courts, there's problem-solving courts, are called different things in different places, but we want to focus on those for people with high risk or need. And some states have done a good job about having courts specific to IDD or brain injury. So those are some things we could consider expanding. And then healthcare services in jail. The Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist from the Veteran Health Administration, if you're working with veterans, they are such a good resource, and they can help that individual really navigate the court system. So in Intercept 4 and 5, now we're looking at jail or prison. And I think that there's a great deal we can do to improve the situation when we talk about these intercepts. One thing is, we want to really work on planning for a smooth transition from jail, making sure there's access to medication and prescriptions when they're released. And there's the 1115 reentry waivers that some states have that are really helping to ensure this can happen. And I think there needs to be more related to that. Trying to connect people to direct services or services directly from jail. And a big part to that is actually connecting before they leave the jail setting, jail or prison, because once they're out, we're going to lose them to follow up. So if we can make the attempt as service providers to actually go to those settings and meet with people and establish trust and a relationship, we're going to have a better opportunity to serve them once they come out. I think that when we look at probation and parole, There's a great opportunity to work with probation and parole officers to think about, again, education about what disability is, how this might affect a person's ability to be successful to meet the conditions of their probation and parole, but also for them to think about, how do I adapt and change how I'm supporting this person so that they can be successful? So I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but I want to talk or touch on the risk need responsivity model. This is a model that is used largely by probation, but in the criminal legal system. And I think it's important as service providers for us to think, how are we speaking the language of the system we're trying to influence? So understanding that this is their framework with risk need responsibility or responsivity helps us to do that. So in this context, risk means the risk to reoffend. Need is what to address, what are those dynamic factors to lower that risk to reoffend. And then responsivity is, how are we going to do that? How will we support the individual? How will we be responsive to their needs so that we can reduce that risk to offend? When we think of risk, it might not be surprising, excuse me, to most of you, but because Zeta was talking about this and Maria about people with disabilities recidivating at higher rates than those without disability, and same for mental health and behavioral health issues. A big part of risk is, when you look at risk assessment, almost all of our folks are going to screen pretty high for risk to reoffend. Just because of the nature of those questions and what they consider risk factors, things like social connectedness, employment, family connectedness. Those are things that a lot of our folks are lacking. And so they end up screening high just generally. And I guess what I want to say to that, there's a couple of responses to think about. One is, if we think systematically, we might need to think carefully about how people are being assessed a risk level, because what that ties to then is greater supervision while in custody. And there's research to show that the more supervision you have sometimes leads to greater criminality, because you're being engaged with other people who are have high criminogenic risk. So I think that's kind of a systems issue. But us understanding that people with disabilities are high risk, I think is an important factor for us to provide that support. And so you can see, when we talk about disability and mental health, what we can see is an increase in agitation, depression, or irritability, and then a decrease in self-regulation, planning, organizing, judgment, reasoning, and problem solving. These two factors, what we're trying to do with the risk need responsivity model, specifically responsivity, is kind of flipping that and helping to provide the skills so that people can increase in the areas where they have deficits and decrease areas where the challenges are. So what can be done to support people who are engaged in the criminal legal system with disability or behavioral health? There's some simple things I think really that can be done, and that is screening and identification is really paramount, so that we understand who we are working with and what challenges they may have. But then it's beyond screening. You don't want to just screen. It's really about then accommodating. And then ultimately, if we can connect people to community supports, that's going to be the biggest benefit. So when we think about screening, as was mentioned, oftentimes people with IDD or brain injury or co-occurring mental health issues do not come into the system with a clear diagnosis. They may not be recognized by the system as having these challenges. So studies do show that understanding a person's disability or mental health can help in understanding their current mental health or emotional states, how they communicate, the difficulties that they may be having, behaviors linked to things like planning, impulse control, the things that the system tends to think of as willful behavior versus skill deficits. And people with disabilities and mental health challenges are more likely to get involved with the criminal legal system than others. We talked about that. There's different reasons for that. Some of it can be by nature of the challenges that they have. Some of it can be by misunderstanding on the law enforcement or legal side. Either way, these are things that we can help to improve. So beyond screening for what the condition is, it's really important to screen for what are their current needs. In the context of brain injury, you can have had a brain injury and not have any current support needs. Those are folks that's great. We just want to be aware they had a brain injury. We want to keep track of that because we know the more injuries a person has, the less likely they are to recover back to their baseline. But a lot of people in our justice system, they are dealing with current needs. And so we need to understand what those are. So that can be done in a variety of ways. Thinking about self-report, thinking about screening tools that can be implemented to try to understand what are some of the challenges that they are facing so we can cater accommodations to their needs. So screening best practices, main thing we want to look for are the tools evidence-based. Are they easy to administer? Are they free or low cost? We are dealing with an overburdened system. And so that's why these things, evidence-based is just good as we know, but in terms of resources, the less time it takes to administer and not costing a lot is going to help us get buy-in from the criminal legal system to actually implement these types of interventions. The other thing is to be careful about applying trauma-informed principles when we think about screening. And this is from the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado that I have borrowed and adapted many times for presentations, because as Zeta said, people coming into the system are already facing trauma. Oftentimes people with disability or co-occurring behavioral health have greater trauma. And so we want to start, some of the ways we can mitigate that is by giving the client an overview of the questions they'll be asked during the screening so they know what to expect. Let them know that we'll only share information that helps identify a disability or mental health issue. The other thing is they can opt out. They don't have to share things that they're not comfortable sharing. Explain that after the screening, the results will be discussed with them. It's not something that's going to be held from them. And really that the main purpose of screening is so that we can help them manage the symptoms or challenges that they're faced with and be sure that we are being person-centered in how we support people. Okay, so when you think about the various audiences and people that this shared learning group is for, clinical professionals can integrate screening into their practice. I think it's just a good idea, especially if you're working with someone who has been engaged in the criminal legal system or are currently engaged, because again, often they are not identified. Direct support professionals can advocate for screening, identify challenges for criminal legal staff as appropriate. I do a lot of work in this area, and we hear from the system, we couldn't possibly take on another thing. But the reality is, and when they understand this is helpful, they're already working with people with disabilities. They're already trying to support people with brain injury or behavioral health issues without having the knowledge and the backing of what can I do to support them. So it's really going to help benefit them in the long run. For family members, advocating for screening and identifying challenges for the criminal legal staff as appropriate. So maybe providing some information that can help improve the outcomes. And then if you're a person with lived experience, as they work towards systems change, thinking about self-advocacy may be important to ensure screening happens and that disabilities are identified.
Just really quickly before we move on, I wanted to flag a couple of things. Stacy in the chat put a brain injury screening tool and a link to the Link Center page on assessment and diagnosis, and that does include a couple of articles that talk about some IDD and mental health screening tools. I also wanted, Judy, hoping you could please expand on what I'm saying here, but thinking about maybe interaction with police isn't necessarily where screening would take place right away. Those are often quick interactions, and it's really important that we have universal approaches for police to be able to identify and support folks. And as you mentioned, other crisis services options. So can you talk about more, some of those settings where screening might take place or be beneficial?
Yeah, thank you, Zeta. Kind of going back again to that sequential intercept model, but that is true. For law enforcement or police, we're not expecting that they would, give us a formal screening tool. For them, what we really want them to be aware of is how to recognize kind of the signs and symptoms. So when they see someone who is maybe having a difficult time recalling information, or maybe appear confused or agitated, to maybe first take a step back and think, I wonder if this person has a disability or experienced a behavioral health issue. So for them, it's more that education and awareness, and thinking about how to see somebody and understand maybe what's happening. Where we can see more formal screening, when we think of the sequential intercept model, it can start happening at the time you're meeting with an attorney, a public defender, an attorney. It can happen when we are looking at the court situation. So maybe having an advocate or someone who helps screen in that setting, all the way through actually to re-entry. When we have more time with the individual is when the screening is best to occur. There's a little bit of a debate, honestly, about timing of screening and whether it makes sense to screen at the point of intake or if it makes sense to screen a little later in the process. I honestly, because this is an evolving situation, I still struggle with the answer to that, because the challenge about screening at intake is people are very agitated at that point. You may not get the best results from screening. They may not trust you. They won't trust you likely. So you're not going to be able to elicit responses if you don't have kind of an established rapport or relationship. So sometimes advocating for screening a little later in the process, once they get to know you, they kind of know what's expected and what's ahead of them, might be a little better. But those are some of the settings in which screening can happen. If you have a partnership with a behavioral health entity, like clinicians, they're great options for screening. Okay, so we don't want to screen just for screening's sake. We've been talking about that. We want to understand the disability or challenge that someone is facing, as well as what their current symptoms are, so that we can adjust and support the person. So one thing that I just want to quickly say is that oftentimes we get caught in this paradigm of people feeling like, I don't know how to support somebody with brain injury or IDD. That's not my training. But in the reality, what we're not asking people to treat brain injury or to change IDD. We're just asking them to understand, in the context of those conditions, what the person's struggling with, and to make some simple accommodations and put into place things like compensatory strategies. So help to make disability and mental health clearer for non-professionals. We're trying to demystify these disabilities and help empower professionals to understand they really do have the ability to support people with disabilities, because they've been trained to support people, period. So the other piece is empowering people with disabilities and behavioral health challenges and their families to speak up for their rights. So really helping to empower and help them advocate for what they need. That's the purpose of screening ultimately. So I think it's really important to understand that what we talk about is really universal design. Everything we talk about in terms of an accommodation or a support for someone with IDD or brain injury or co-occurring mental health is going to be helpful for absolutely everyone, as I mentioned early on, walking into the criminal legal system. The difference is, though, it's vital for people with IDD and brain injury and co-occurring mental health challenges. Without it, they will not succeed. So what am I talking about? I mean, I think that what we want to think about is, what are people seeing? What will you see? And when we think about like concerns with language, we're going to see that people do not interpret body language correctly. They maybe have inappropriate eye contact, difficulties maintaining kind of a personal space and personal bubble. They say too much or too little. Maybe they're not aware of behavior that they're having. They may say, huh, a lot, indicating that they're not following, they're confused. They tend to be followers and they struggle with sarcasm or not when people use euphemisms and different things, which once you start paying attention, we do that a lot in our society. Other issues that may come with language is that people may be withdrawn because they don't understand. They may struggle with grammar. They have difficulties following, or they're difficult to follow in a conversation, challenges with staying on topic, navigating social rules. We have me withdraw twice. So what I want to just, I'm not going to go through all of these really specifically, but just to give you a taste for what we're talking about when we talk about supporting and compensating and accommodating or adjusting. There's some very simple strategies that we can put in place and everybody can do it. You don't have to be a brain injury professional. You don't have to be a person who's a professional working with people with IDD or behavioral health. These are just some common sense, universal things to think about. So if someone's struggling, be direct. Don't use abstract language or humor. Give them some wait time. Allow them time to process what's being said so they can formulate an answer. Really being clear about what your directions and expectations are, providing those things one at a time. Asking them, would it be helpful to repeat or rephrase the message that you just gave them? And let them know that you value their input, thoughts, and feelings. As we know, people with disabilities and people with behavioral health issues are discounted a lot. And so that's the framework they're coming into this with, is just assuming that we'll probably be discounting because that's the experience they've had. So taking a step back and letting them know you value what they have to say is an important step. So beyond some of those accommodations or adaptations that you can make within the system, it's also thinking about how do we connect people to community services. So establishing partnerships and referral mechanisms between the criminal legal entities and service providers is the first step. And oftentimes it is us who work in the disability space going to the criminal legal system, say, hey, we're out there. But other times they are also reaching out and looking for those referral sources. So just making yourself known, making yourself open to that as a direct provider. The unique needs of specialty populations should be taken into consideration when you're making those referrals. So it's essential to connect individuals to gender responsive services. We want those to be easily accessible and flexible, ensure access to victims advocacy services as needed. They should also be culturally responsive to historically marginalized groups, such as BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ communities, who tend to be overrepresented in the criminal legal system, just as was presented earlier. If you haven't seen the October Shared Learning Group, that would be a really good one to listen to. I listened to it recently and I learned a lot. And so it gives you a good insight and perspective. So if you haven't listened to that one, I think it has a lot of value to add to this particular Shared Learning Group. And then the other component is thinking about targeted case management. The other thing I want to just say or reiterate to this is, as much as possible, reaching into the system prior to a person being released from supervision is where we're going to see the link to these services be the most successful. So anyway, we want to make sure that there's intensive case management that helps individual access appropriate services and involve directly assisting the individual with applications, appointments, problem solving, and advocacy. So as much as possible that we can provide those higher intensity case management services, the better off a person will be. So thinking about your own roles, how can you ensure connection to community services? And so I know we're talking to direct support professionals, going to run through all of these. Clinical professionals can support people in accessing additional appropriate services or connecting to case management services. Direct support professionals can provide support with accessing or providing targeted case management directly to connect individuals to resources. And again, family members can be advocating for connection to community supports. And same with people with lived experiences. as they work towards systemic change. Self-advocacy is going to, again, be a really important tool. So with this, I want to turn it over now to Jean and Max to lead us in the group exercise.
Well, I hope that, oh, there I am. All right. Well, thank you for turning it over to me and Jean. So what we're going to do now is we will present a scenario that talks about, navigating the criminal and legal system. And what we hope is that we hear from you about how you think about this topic through this discussion around the scenario. There are no, wrong answers and ideas because we believe you are the experts of your own, experiences, and we want to hear from you. And the Link Center wants to know what you are thinking so we can elevate things you bring up that we haven't thought about, and so we can take action on some things as well. So the way this works is you can raise your hand to come off mute and even come on camera if you want. You can write your thoughts in the chat, or you can email us. We would put our email in the chat for you. And remember, just, if you need to step away or take a minute to regulate and calm, please feel free to do so, because your health and well-being matters to us. All right, let's go. All right, okay. All right, here we go. So here is a scenario. Malik is a 17-year-old male with IDD and a history of depression. He was placed in a juvenile detention facility. He had trouble understanding the rules, following staff instructions, and was quickly labeled as non-compliant. His disability and mental health needs were not considered in his care, and he risks being sent to a long-term juvenile detention facility instead of getting the support he needs. So here's the questions, and I'm going to do one at a time. What steps can you take to ensure Malik's needs are understood and addressed by the criminal legal system? What steps can you take to ensure Malik's needs are understood and addressed by the criminal justice system?
Max, this is Jean, and I'm going to read out some of the answers.
All right.
One is that he needs an evaluation to determine diagnoses and appropriate treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle said that. Angie says, does Malik have a guardian that can explain to him in a manner he'll understand?
Mm-hmm. Anybody else on this question before I move to the next?
There's Regina says that, let's see, establish a relationship that creates a safe environment to communicate with him. Michelle says review historical information.
Mm-hmm.
These are all good
Very good.
questions. Yeah. Also, Maggie says that Malik and guardians should understand their ADA rights and responsibilities as much as possible ahead of time.
Nice.
And do staff know that he has a disability? Durga suggested that question or made that.
Mhm. There we go.
Also, Janae says staff witnessing the ongoing behavioral concerns should be opening this discussion with supervision and potential health care on site to discuss whether this is intentional or if there is a concern. That would identify the problem, as often people from disadvantaged backgrounds do not have access to identifying disabilities readily. And then Regina also notes staff should have training in advance of this to better understand opportunities and to understand how to both document and address Malik's needs. That's
Right.
a great segue into the next question.
And the next question is, how would you advocate for Malik to get the right evaluation? How would you advocate for Malik to get the right evaluation?
Michelle says to coordinate a treatment team and a group meeting to discuss concerns. Angie says I would ensure the court knew his diagnoses.
Mhm.
Angie says I would, let's see. Let me see. And then Maggie says the ADA requires that state and local governments have a specific person dedicated to assist with disability issues, also known as an ADA coordinator. The person should be located and brought into the conversation. Michelle continues to say, collaborate with his guardian, who can formally request the evaluation after team discussion. And Janae shared, there are medical staff on site that should be able to be tapped into to monitor what's going on and to provide the appropriate diagnoses.
Were there some things in the chat, Gene, that you skipped? They were popping up very quickly.
Yeah.
I think you may have skipped Angie. I would ensure the court knew his
Okay.
DX,
Yeah.
and then maybe coordinate a treatment team and,
Discuss the concerns.
okay.
Also, I think I might have not caught Janae's comment that this is where the on-site social workers
Mm-hmm.
should be involved in providing advocacy.
All right.
Thank you for noting that, Max.
Screen, document, and seek resources with a diverse team. That's from Regina.
Right.
All right. I think we may be caught up.
I think so.
I hope.
Yeah.
So unless there's any other answer to the second question, I'll move on to the third. And that is, how would you involve his family, community healthcare providers, or other supportive people to create a plan for his successful reentry? Oh, Durga
Durga says that maybe connecting to a disability expert.
Okay, that's from the last one. Okay,
That,
all right.
I don't know, that just came on. And then Rebecca says we would coordinate a community planning meeting that would allow all involved in his treatment, reentry to provide information and support.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay Foster says I would use the life course model and tailor it to the situation.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Janae Longoria says, recent reentry should involve ensuring that understanding and treatment of his diagnoses while in detention should graduate smoothly to outside resources once discharged. It's the same as transferring care smoothly on the outside. Just because they are in detention doesn't mean that they are treated less than those who aren't.
Oh, there's a lot of them coming in fast.
Regina says, be sure to check with Malik first to determine his comfort level with different family members' involvement.
Okay. Did you get all the others, or
I did. I believe I did
Okay.
get the others, yeah.
all right? I think there's one that came up from Michelle.
Team, oh yeah, Michelle Mowry. The team also needs to identify his strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So many great points. I believe I have,
So I think yeah. I think the last question is, oh, wait a minute, here we go. There's another one
Rebecca.
from Rebecca. Yeah.
Yeah, Rebecca says, we also have a complex case department that assists with individuals with co-occurring issues that would help facilitate. And then Michelle Mowry asks, do we have any details, information about his communication skills? Is his behavior a form of communication?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, important question.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of questions, I think the last one that we're going to ask is, how can we hold the system accountable to support Malik appropriately? How can we hold the system accountable to support Malik appropriately?
Maggie Sims says, insist on involving an ADA coordinator, and if a person believes they have not received proper treatment, then they can file a formal ADA complaint with the Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
Regina says, clear documentation of the support plan.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Yep, Janae Longoria says, it's difficult when we are not involved. From the outside, if we are not family, we can't know if the system's holding up. Helping educate the family on their involvement and rights is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle Mowry says, this is where I struggle with, honestly. Will you provide suggestions? Regina Cisneros says, be sure Malik knows his rights, is empowered to advocate, and has a point of contact for support. You know, Michelle, I think this is an area that we all can learn a lot from each other on. Holding the system accountable, it is, it's complicated and differs across the country in terms of the kinds of things that we can do.
This is Judy. Can I just jump in real quick?
Please.
Honestly, I think the system sometimes, this may be difficult to understand, but I think the system sometimes doesn't know what they're needing to be doing. And so I think it starts with educating them. And I'll just give you a quick scenario, because I was doing a training on brain injury within a Department of Corrections setting for behavioral health folks that worked across the state. And during the training, I mentioned something about the ADA, and they said, well, does this fit under the ADA? So the fact that this was about brain injury specifically, they didn't understand that brain injury would fit as part of the ADA. So I think there's a need to educate the personnel working in the criminal legal system to really, for them to understand what a person's rights are. I mean, would other people agree with? I'm curious if anybody else had that. Okay, I thank you, Maggie.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and Rebecca Solandro says, I may have missed this. Did we ensure he has an attorney? If so, I would continually follow up with the attorney to ensure he's moving through the system in a timely manner. And then Maggie Sim agreed with Judy and said, it's very common to misunderstand the ADA. And I think that Judy brought up a good point in that pieces of this, that what we're calling the system may think that they're doing the right thing or may not know what the right thing is doing and may not be communicating with other entities that are also trying to support the person. So it's complicated in that how do you make sure that everyone has the same information also? Well, Max, I don't think there are any other comments.
I don't see any. I don't see any other comments in chat.
No.
I didn't see any hands raised to come off mute, so I really think that we are all set here, unless somehow somebody put something in chat that they couldn't press the enter button before they could spell out what they were trying to.
And if that's the case, be sure to let us know, and it'll be wonderful to be able to, look at all of these cool ideas.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think on that note, I think we turn it back to whoever.
I think we turn it over to Carly now.
Okay. Someone.
Wendy.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Well, that was wonderful. And thank you everybody for making all your contributions. My name is Wendy Morris. I am with the National Association for State Mental Health Program Directors, or NASHPD. I'm one of the partners here at the Link Center. So just go ahead and continue to add your comments to the chat, what you're doing for your go-to resources, for training, for websites, where you get information and support that are going to help us to develop the materials and really inform us about where you go for information and navigate risky behaviors, right? That shared learning. We want to learn from you today as well. Slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's a schedule. Here's the schedule of our past and upcoming shared learning groups. You can find recordings, transcripts, and material from past events on our website, which we'll share in a minute. And you can find and register for the upcoming shared learning groups as well. You'll see that our next topic will be in April, and that will be on developing regulation and coping skills. Next slide. So here is our website, and you can visit the Link Center's website at any time. The address and the link are both here on the screen, and we'll drop it in the chat as well. You can also email us at the Link Center if you have questions or you have suggestions. So we encourage you to do that. Next slide. We do have a quick evaluation that we really hope you will complete for us. It doesn't take long. On the screen is a QR code that you can scan with your phone. And again, we'll put the link in the chat as well. It'll pop up when we close today automatically, and it will also be sent to everybody by an email. So you can do it now, which would be great, or you can do it later if you don't have the time. But your feedback on this evaluation really helps us to make improvements and adjustments for future webinars and products. Again, that shared learning, your feedback really helps inform us. Next slide. So again, we want to thank you for participating today. We want to make a special thank you to our colleagues at NASHA, the National Association for State Head Injury Administrators. We also want to would like to thank the members of the Link Center Steering Committee for their time and valuable input on these shared learning groups. And thank you also to the Administration for Community Living, ACL, and to all the partners for contributing to the preparation of and the content for this meeting. And that's all for today. So everybody have a great afternoon, and thank you. Thank you.